Paralyzed with fear, little MAGA girl was trapped by leftist mob, but a WWII veteran walked in and shouted, "Subscribe to the channel right now to find out the end of this epic story and comment below which part of this great America you are watching from." The midday sun offered no warmth, only a raw, unforgiving light that exposed the scars of a divided metropolis. The city, once a beacon of hope and progress, had morphed into a suffocating concrete maze where the walls of the skyscrapers seemed to close in on individuals, echoing not the sound of commerce or life, but the dissonant cries of an undeclared cultural war. The air was heavy, charged with the static electricity of 1,000 conflicting ideologies, a sour smell of hot asphalt mixed with the palpable tension of a society on the verge of moral collapse. In the center of this maelstrom walked Aurora. At 14, she was the image of the youthful purity that America seemed to have forgotten. Her steps were light but hesitant, as if the ground beneath her feet were glass about to shatter. She wasn't there to provoke, nor to fight. She was merely existing, an American girl trying to cross the downtown area. But on that day, her existence was, in itself, an act of rebellion. Upon her light brown hair rested the object of her condemnation and her pride, a vibrant red cap. The white letters, MAGA, embroidered with precision, shone under the sun like a beacon. To Aurora, that cap wasn't just a fashion accessory or a superficial political statement. It was a sacred link to her grandfather, to Sunday family dinners, to the unwavering belief that her country was, fundamentally, good, free, and blessed by God. It was a symbol of WWII patriotism, of tikkaketul, love for the flag, and respect for order. However, to the eyes watching her from the dark street corners and the crowded cafes of cynical intellectuals, that piece of red fabric was a declaration of war. Aurora felt it before she heard it. It was a change in the atmospheric pressure around her, like when the sea recedes before a tsunami. The usual traffic noise was suddenly muffled by a rising murmur, a buzzing of angry wasps organizing for the attack. She clutched the strap of her pink backpack to her chest, an instinctive gesture of self-protection. Her clear, innocent blue eyes swept the street. What she saw chilled her blood. They weren't just passers-by. It was a mass, a collective entity moving with a singular, terrifying purpose. They were mostly young, dressed in the paradoxical uniformity of modern rebellion. Dark clothing, hair dyed in artificial neon colors, and faces contorted into masks of moral superiority. They were the leftist mob, the vanguard of social justice, the keyboard warriors who had decided to materialize their digital hatred in the real world. They didn't see a 14-year-old girl. They didn't see Aurora, the girl who loved to draw and helped out at the local church. They saw a target. They saw the embodiment of everything their college professors and digital influencers had told them to hate. They saw the enemy. "Look, over there!" A shrill voice cut the air, pointing an accusing finger in her direction. The shout served as a trigger. Heads snapped in unison. Dozens of pairs of eyes fixed on her, not with curiosity, but with a predatory recognition. The little MAGA girl froze, paralyzed. The human instinct to flee battled the shock of being the center of so much hostility. Quickly, the space around Aurora began to shrink. The radical left didn't run. They flowed around her like an oil slick, blocking the exits, occupying the physical and psychological space. Makeshift signs were raised, scribbled with slogans of hatred disguised as virtue. Zero tolerance for intolerance. Dismantle the patriarchy. Silence is violence. The bitter irony of those phrases, brandished against a solitary, silent girl, went unnoticed by the mob, hypnotized by its own rhetoric. The sound dramatically increased. Cheap plastic megaphones crackled, amplifying screeching voices that began to chant rehearsed slogans. "No place for fascism! No place for hate!" they screamed as their faces distorted into expressions of pure scorn and aggression. Aurora took a step back, but her back met the coldness of a lamppost. She was cornered. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would break her ribs. "Why are they so angry?" she thought, confusion battling with panic. "I didn't do anything. I'm just wearing my cap." The city around her seemed complicit. Cars passed, drivers looked away, afraid of becoming the next target if they showed any sympathy for the girl in the red cap. The police, constrained by red tape and the fear of being cancelled by the media, were absent, or perhaps, conveniently, looking the other way a few blocks distant. Aurora was on a desert island of vulnerability, surrounded by an ocean of ideological sharks. It was then that the amorphous mass gained a face. A path opened through the middle of the crowd, as if royalty were passing. But it wasn't a king, it was the Inquisitor. He stood out not for physical strength, but for the aura of intellectual arrogance he emanated. Young, perhaps in his early 20s, with thick-rimmed glasses and a T-shirt with ironic sayings about capitalism. He held a megaphone in one hand and a cell phone in the other, filming everything, ready to broadcast the destruction of a life to his followers, thirsty for cancellation. This was Ko. The woke antagonist. The archetype of the radical woke. He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold, calculating, analyzing Aurora like an entomologist studies an insect before pinning it. He knew he held the power. He had the mob, he had the narrative, and he had the perfect victim. He approached Aurora's comfort zone, invading her personal space with a violent intimacy. The smell of stale coffee and manufactured outrage accompanied him. "Well, well, what do we have here?" His voice, amplified by the megaphone, sounded distorted and metallic, hurting Aurora's ears. "A little fascist in training? Lost far from your hate rally, sweetie." The crowd laughed, a cruel, collective laugh that served to legitimize the bullying. Aurora felt tears burn behind her eyes, but she bit her lower lip, refusing to cry. Her grandfather always said, "Patriots don't bow to fear." But her grandfather wasn't there, and the fear was a living, icy creature crawling up her spine. I just want to go home," Aurora whispered, her trembling voice barely audible above the noise. "Home." The doctor to Leftist scoffed, turning to his audience to ensure his performance was being appreciated. "You think you have the right to feel safe while displaying that symbol of oppression? You think you can just walk through our streets spreading this toxic ideology without consequences?" He took another step. Now he was so close that Aurora could see the pores of his skin and the fanaticism dilating his pupils. His cell phone camera was inches from her face, capturing every nuance of her terror for the entertainment of the digital masses. "We are tolerance," he yelled, ironically intolerant, "and we will not tolerate you." Aurora looked up toward the sky, seeking a piece of blue between the skyscrapers, seeking God, seeking anything that wasn't that wall of hatred. But the sky was grey, and the city seemed to have closed its doors to mercy. She was the Trump girls, alone, small, and about to be devoured by the reputation-shredding machine of the 21st century. The nightmare was only beginning. The atmosphere around Aurora shifted from a silent tension to a visceral storm. The human circle closed in even further, eliminating any route of escape, transforming the sidewalk into a claustrophobic arena where the only rule was ideological submission. The Leftist. Realizing he had the full attention of his captive audience and the lenses of dozens of smartphones, elevated his sadistic performance to a new level. He didn't just want to humiliate, he wanted to deconstruct the girl, piece by piece, until nothing remained but a tearful apology that validated his own distorted virtue. He began to pace back and forth in front of her, gesturing theatrically like a professor reprimanding an insolent student, but with the malice of an inquisitor. The megaphone, now lowered, served as a command baton, rhythmically pointing at the little MAGA girlie's chest. "You see this?" he shouted to the crowd, which responded with howls of approval. "You see the audacity? While we fight to dismantle power structures, while we scream for climate justice and gender equity, this child dares to rub the supreme symbol of regression in our faces." Aurora felt her stomach churn. The air seemed scarce, sucked away by the frantic energy of the mob at B. She tried to step back further, but her shoulder blades already ached against the cold concrete of the building behind her. She was a cornered animal, and the predator knew it. The red cap on her head, once a source of pride, now seemed to weigh a ton, a target painted on her forehead. "I'm not hurting anyone," Aurora whispered, her voice choked by the tears she fought to hold back. It was a fragile, almost inaudible whisper, but the leftist, with his selective hearing for victimhood, caught the phrase and immediately distorted it. He spun around sharply, invading her personal space with shocking aggression. The smell of sweat and fanaticism was suffocating. "You're not hurting anyone. Your ignorance is violence. Your silence is complicity. That red cap is a punch in the face to every oppressed minority in this city. How dare you speak of innocence when you wear the oppressor's uniform?" The circular, delusional logic of the radical woke hit Aurora like physical slaps. No dialogue was possible, no exchange of ideas. There was only a furious dogma that demanded total conformity. The crowd, fueled by the leader's words, began to chant a new slogan, clapping in a tribal, menacing rhythm. Text, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, MAGA has got to go." Text, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, MAGA has got to go." The sound was deafening. It vibrated in Aurora's bones, making her teeth chatter. She looked at the faces around her. Young college students, middle-aged women with designer glasses, men with carefully groomed beards, people who, in any other context, could be her neighbors or teachers. But here, infected by the virus of the collective mind, they were monsters. Their eyes showed no empathy, only a feverish glare of moral righteousness. They were convinced that terrorizing a 14-year-old girl was an act of revolutionary heroism. The woke antagonist realized the girl was on the verge of collapse. It was the moment he had been waiting for, the climax of his social media video. He needed the money shot, the image of surrender. He turned off the megaphone and approached so closely that Aurora could see the distorted reflections of her own terrified face in the lenses of his glasses. "We're going to make things easy for you, little girl," he said, his voice dropping to a falsely soft, dangerously calm tone. "We are merciful. We believe in re-education. You only have to do one thing for all this to stop." Aurora, trembling, looked up at him, her blue eyes overflowing with tears that finally began to stream down her pale cheeks. She couldn't speak. Fear had sealed her throat. "Kneel," the leftist commanded, a cruel smile curving his lips. "Kneel and apologize for your privilege. Take that fascist rag off your head, throw it on the ground, and renounce the hatred your parents taught you. Do it now, and we'll let you go." The demand hung in the air, heavy and grotesque. Kneel, renounce her faith, her family, her love for her country. The depatriotism her grandfather had taught her wasn't about hate. It was about freedom, about courage, about honoring the stars and stripes. But here, surrounded by the mob, courage seemed a distant concept. No, Aurora sobbed, the word emerging as a moan of pain. The refusal, however weak, enraged the leftist. The smile vanished, replaced by a scowl of pure fury. The patience of tolerance was over. "No?" he roared, his voice cracking. "You think you have a choice? You think your free speech is worth more than our feelings? You're a pest, and pests need to be eradicated." He reached out his hand, fingers bunched like claws, heading straight for the cap. It was no longer just a verbal attack. The physical barrier was about to be breached. The crowd surged forward with him, a human tidal wave ready to swallow her. Anonymous hands tugged at her backpack, pushed her shoulders. Aurora flinched, covering her head with her arms, trying to protect the symbol of her identity, trying to protect herself. "Take it off her! Burn it!" someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "Stop! Please!" Aurora cried, a sharp, desperate sound that was lost in the cacophony of hatred. She squeezed her eyes shut, awaiting the impact, awaiting the violence, awaiting the end. The system had failed. The city had abandoned her. She was alone in the dark, about to be crushed by the boot of radicalism. The fear was cold and absolute, paralyzing every muscle in her tiny body. In that second, the injustice was so dense it seemed to block the sun. The little MAGA girl was defeated, and the woken mob savored the imminent victory with a voracious appetite. The leftist's fingers were millimeters from the cap's brim. Time seemed to have dilated, stretching that second of violation into an eternity of terror. Aurora could see the dirt under her attacker's fingernails, could feel the heat of his hand, anxious to rip away her identity and throw it into the gutter. The noise of the crowd reached a fever pitch, a roar of beasts thirsty for the moment of sacrifice. There was nowhere to run. There was no one to call. The triumph of intolerance seemed inevitable, sealed by the cruel destiny of a society that had lost its way. Aurora closed her eyes tightly, hunching her shoulders, preparing for the final humiliation, for the physical touch that would break her spirit for good. Suddenly, the sound was not a scream, it was thunder. A vocal command so potent, so charged with a primal, unquestionable authority, that it cut the stifling air like a blade of tempered steel, instantly silencing the cacophony of megaphones and the howls of the mob. "To stand back from her, now!" The voice did not tremble. It did not plead. It commanded. It came from a deep place, forged not in college campus debates or internet comment sections, but in the fire of artillery, the roar of tank engines, and the solemn silence of military cemeteries. It was the voice of an America the crowd thought was dead, but which had just awakened with a righteous fury. The leftist froze. His hand stopped in midair, hovering over Aurora's head like the claw of a petrified gargoyle. He blinked, confused, the arrogance draining from his face as he slowly turned toward the source of that impossible sound. The crowd, once a single organism of hatred, fragmented in confusion, heads turning, eyes wide. There he was, breaking through the crowd barrier not with pushes, but with a presence that forced the sea of bodies to part. Colonel Marcus Holloway. He was an anachronistic, glorious sight. He wore his full-dress uniform, an impeccable olive drab that seemed not to have a single crease out of place. On his chest, a constellation of medals and ribbons shone under the merciless sun. The bright and purple heart, the B, Silver Star, and the Legion of Merit. Every piece of metal was a testament to spilled blood, to lost friends, and to a courage that this generation of social justice warriors would never understand. He leaned on a dark, polished wooden cane, but he didn't look frail. On the contrary, the cane seemed like a royal scepter, or perhaps a sheathed weapon. Despite his advanced age, with wrinkles mapping his face like trenches from a long battle, his eyes burned with a fierce vitality. They were not the eyes of a tired old man. They were the eyes of an eagle that spotted a serpent threatening its nest. The WWII veteran advanced into the center of the circle, the rhythmic sound of his cane tapping the asphalt. Tap, tap, tap was the only sound on the street now. It was the sound of judgment approaching. He stopped exactly between the leftist Rusk and the little MAGA girl, placing his fragile body shielded by honor as an insurmountable human barrier. He looked at the aggressor, and the difference in moral stature was so vast that it seemed the colonel was looking down from a mountaintop. "What do you think you're doing, soldier?" The colonel spat the word soldier with a contempt that turned it into an insult. "You think yourself a brave man, surrounding a 14-year-old girl with your pack of hyenas?" The woke antagonist tried to regain his composure. He adjusted his glasses, attempting to invoke the rhetoric that always worked against his opponents online. "You don't understand, Grandpa. She's a symbol of..." Silence. The veteran's cry was so sudden and explosive that the young man physically recoiled, nearly tripping over his own feet. "I did not cross the Atlantic Ocean. I did not watch my brothers dye the sands of Normandy red to come back 70 years later and see a coward like you terrorize a child on American soil." The crowd was paralyzed. No one dared to raise a sign. No one dared to shout a slogan. The raw reality of true sacrifice stood before them, exposing the emptiness of their performative outrage. Colonel Holloway's uniform radiated a dignity that made the dyed clothes and colored hair of the mob look ridiculous, childish. The veteran pointed his cane at the leftist's chest, the rubber tip touching the young man's ironic t-shirt. "You talk about fascism?" Holloway's voice dropped to a dangerous growl. "I looked fascism in the eye, boy. I saw what it does. I smelled the camps. I saw the piles of bodies. Fascism is the imposition of will by force. It is the silencing of dissent through fear." He lightly pushed the young man with the cane, forcing him to take another step back. "Look at yourself. Look at this crowd. You are what you claim to hate. You are the tyrants with megaphones." Aurora, still huddled against the wall, opened her eyes. Through the tears, she saw the colonel's straight back. The smell of mothballs, old leather, and bravery replaced the stench of fear. For the first time in hours, her heart slowed down. She was no longer alone. America's past had come to rescue its future. The leftist, desperate not to lose control of the narrative in front of his followers who were filming, attempted one last pathetic gambit. "This is hate speech. You're defending an intolerant person. Her cap." "Her cap," Holloway interrupted, whirling to face the crowd, his voice projecting without the need for electronic amplification, "is protected by the same Constitution that I swore to defend with my life. I fought for her right to wear that cap, just as I fought for your right to be an ungrateful fool. But my oath did not include allowing you to crush her." He turned to Aurora, and the transformation on his face was miraculous. The hardness of the warrior melted, revealing the kindness of a grandfather. He extended a gloved hand, firm and secure. "Stand up, my young lady," he said softly. "A patriot should never shrink before tyranny. Stand tall. Show them who you are." Aurora grasped the veteran's hand. She felt the strength in his fingers, an electric current of courage passing from him to her. She stood up, wiping away her tears, straightening her pink dress. Colonel Holloway adjusted the MAGA cap on her head, ensuring it was perfectly aligned. "There you go," he said, smiling. "Now they'll have to go through me." The climax was set. The leftist was humiliated, exposed as a bully without substance. The brute force of numbers had been nullified by the absolute force of character. But the villain, wounded in his narcissistic ego, would not retreat without attempting one last venomous move. The physical battle was avoided, but the institutional war was about to be threatened. The silence that followed Colonel Holloway's intervention was heavy but purifying. The bubble of collective hysteria had burst. Those young people, who moments before seemed like bloodthirsty predators, now looked like what they really were: Confused children playing at being revolutionaries, suddenly confronted by a real adult. Shame began to spread through the crowd like a contagion. Megaphones were lowered, signs were gathered, and many began to walk away, pretending to look at their cell phones, avoiding the old warrior's piercing gaze. However, the Leftist, the leader of that demoralized pack, did not possess the necessary dignity to accept defeat. His ego, inflated by years of validation in digital bubbles, was mortally wounded. He backed away physically, but his mind frantically searched for a weapon the colonel couldn't block with a cane or war medals. If he couldn't break them on the street, he would destroy them in the cloud. With hands trembling from contained rage, he raised his smartphone again, pointing the shaky lens directly at the faces of the colonel and Aurora. The small circle of flashlight looked like the evil eye of a digital entity. "You think you won, old man?" The Leftist hissed, his voice dripping venom. "This isn't over. You have no idea who you're messing with. I have thousands of followers. In an hour, the video of your assault on peaceful protesters will be everywhere." He spun the camera to Aurora, who instinctively tried to hide behind the colonel's arm. "And you, MAGA girl, get ready. The internet doesn't forgive. We're going to dox you. We'll find out where you study. We'll call your parents' company. Tomorrow morning your name will be synonymous with hate. You will be cancelled, banned, excluded. Your life is over." It was the ultimate modern threat: social death, digital exile. The promise that the system, weaponized and merciless, would come to finish the job the mob failed to complete. Aurora felt a new kind of fear, a cold pit in her stomach facing an invisible, omnipresent enemy. Will they tell my school? Will my parents lose their jobs because of me? Panic threatened to return, but Colonel Holloway merely let out a short, dry laugh, a sound of pure scorn. He didn't look intimidated, he looked bored. "Cancelled!" The veteran repeated the word as if tasting rotten fruit. "Son, I was bombed by the Luftwaffe. I was targeted by MG-42 machine guns. I spent winters in trenches where the water froze in our boots. Do you really think I'm afraid of tweets?" He took a step forward, and the Leftist, for all his digital bravado, took 2 real steps back. Physical reality still commanded respect. "Go ahead," Holloway challenged, opening his arms. "Indre, post your video. Show the world how a 90-year-old man had to defend a child from a grown man yelling at girls. Let's see who the real America will support. Your bubble isn't the country, boy. You make a lot of noise, but you're hollow inside." The colonel then made a gesture with his hand, like shooing away an annoying fly. "Now, get out of my sight before I lose my temper and decide to teach you some old-fashioned manners." The woke antagonist hesitated, his finger hovering over the record button. He looked around and saw that his army had deserted. He was alone, exposed, and ridiculous. With a final grunt of impotent frustration, he lowered his cell phone. "You'll regret this," he muttered, turning his back and disappearing into the concrete jungle, defeated not by violence but by irrelevance. With the threat finally dissipated, the tension in Aurora's body dissolved, and her legs gave way. She would have fallen had the colonel's strong arm not steadied her. He guided her to a nearby concrete bench, away from the street's center, creating a makeshift sanctuary of calm. "Breathe. Aurora," he said, his voice now soft, grandfatherly, and protective. He pulled a flawlessly white handkerchief from his pocket and offered it to her. "Wipe your face. Don't give them the satisfaction of seeing your tears." Aurora accepted the handkerchief, drying her face. She looked at the colonel, still trembling slightly. "Sir, what if he's right? What if they come after my family? They said I'm bad, that my cap is hate, Colonel Holloway sighed, sitting down beside her with difficulty, his cane resting between his knees. He looked at the city horizon, his eyes misted with memories. "They say that because they are afraid, my dear. They are afraid of those who don't bow down. They created a world where obedience is virtue and courage is a crime." He turned to her, holding her gaze with intensity. "Their cancellation is smoke. It's a shadow on the wall. Honor. Honor is solid rock. As long as you know who you are and what you love, they can never truly touch you." He lightly touched the brim of her red cap. "This country has faced tyrants much worse than boys with smartphones. We survived because ordinary people like you decided not to give up. You did nothing wrong, Aurora. You were just free, and freedom always has a price, but it is worth paying." Aurora nodded, absorbing the words. The threat of cancellation still hung like a dark cloud on the horizon, but the veteran's presence was a storm-proof shelter. Fear was giving way to something new, a silent resolution. The battle in the street was over, but the lesson was only beginning to take root in her soul. The colonel stood up, offering his hand to her once more. "Come, I'll escort you to a safe place. The mission isn't over until you're home." They began to walk, an unlikely pair, the old warrior and the young patriot, moving away from the scene of the conflict, leaving behind the echo of intolerance, walking toward an outcome of hope and restoration. They walked together for a few blocks, leaving behind the oppressive shadow of the downtown skyscrapers and entering an area where the sunlight finally seemed to reach the ground. The noise of the angry mob had completely disappeared, replaced by the comforting sound of ordinary life. Birds singing in a small park, children laughing, the wind rustling the leaves of the trees. It was as if, by crossing that invisible line beside the colonel, Aurora had entered another America, the real, sane, and eternal America. Colonel Holloway stopped in front of a flagpole situated at the entrance of an old federal building of solid classical architecture. The American flag, large and majestic, fluttered lazily at the top, its red and white stripes shining against the clearing blue sky. "Look up, Aurora," the veteran said, pointing with his cane at the starry banner. "Do you know why that flag is beautiful? It's not because of the colors or the fabric. It's because it's heavy. It carries the weight of millions of lives, of dreams, of sacrifices. And today, my dear, you helped carry some of that weight." Aurora lifted her face, her blue eyes now dry and clear, reflecting the stars on the flag. The shame the woke antagonist had tried to implant in her soul had evaporated. In its place, something stronger, warmer, was born: pride. "But I was afraid, Colonel," she confessed, her voice firm for the first time. "I almost took off the cap. I almost gave up." The old warrior smiled, a smile full of wrinkles and wisdom, and placed both hands on the girl's shoulders. "Courage is not the absence of fear, Aurora. Courage is being scared to death and still doing the right thing. You didn't take off the cap. You stood there. You weathered their storm of hate and you didn't break. They wanted your submission, but you gave them only your quiet dignity. That is more than most grown men would do today." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a small metallic object. It was an antique, golden American eagle pin. With solemn gestures, he pinned the badge to the strap of Aurora's pink backpack, right below the MAGA cap. "I've carried this with me since 1944, he said, his voice choked with emotion. It was my good luck charm against real tyranny. Now it's yours. Consider it a passing of the torch. My generation did its part. We held the line against the monsters outside. Now it's your generation's turn to hold the line against the monsters within, against forgetfulness, against ingratitude, against those who want to erase who we are." Aurora touched the small golden pin, feeling the cold of the metal and the warmth of the meaning. She was no longer just a scared girl. She had been decorated on the cultural battlefield. She was a soldier of freedom. "I promise," Aurora said, and this time her voice sounded like an oath. "I will never stop wearing my cap. I will never be ashamed to love America." "I know you won't." The colonel nodded, satisfied. He stepped back and, ignoring the pain in his joints, raised his right hand in a perfect military salute, stiff and respectful. It wasn't the salute of a superior to a subordinate, but of one hero to another. "Dismissed, Soldier Aurora. Go home. Your family must be proud." Aurora returned a radiant smile, the kind of smile that lights up the world and drives away the darkness. She turned and began to walk toward the train station, but her steps were different now. She didn't walk hunched over. She walked with her head held high, the red cap shining like a crown of defiance and freedom. As she walked away, people on the street, the so-called silent majority who had watched everything, began to react. An honest construction worker, covered in dust, gave her a thumbs up. A lady walking her dog smiled and winked. A truck driver honked in approval. They saw what happened. They saw the attempted humiliation, and they saw the victory of innocence. Without saying a word, the real city embraced the little MAGA girl. The narrative of hate, built with screams and threats of cancellation, crumbled before the simple, powerful truth of a girl who refused to hate herself. The woke antagonist and his mob were just bitter footnotes in history, dust in the wind. But Aurora was the future. The final image is of Aurora stopping at the corner, looking back one last time. Colonel Holloway had already disappeared, like a guardian angel who fulfills his mission and departs. But the feeling of protection remained. She touched the brim of her cap, adjusted the backpack with the golden eagle, and turned toward the setting sun, which bathed the street in gold. She knew there would be other difficult days. She knew the world out there was confused and often hostile, but she also knew she would never be alone. The values she carried, faith, freedom, family, were eternal. America was not lost. Not as long as there was a patriotic girl willing to wear her red cap and smile in the face of fury. Justice triumphed, freedom prevailed, and in the heart of a little girl the flame of American hope burned brighter than ever, impossible to extinguish.